power struggle between us, I guess you would say. There was a little bit of a fight that broke out between us. I wanted to go off and do my own thing, and he wanted me to do what he did.
Bob Ross built a world of calm, color, and comfort. But in 2025, his son Steve is pulling back the curtain on a truth far more turbulent. Behind those soothing brushstrokes lies a legacy marked by betrayal, ownership battles, and a family story the public was never meant to hear. As Steve steps forward with new revelations, the charming TV myth begins to crack, revealing the real cost of being tied to a painting legend. This is the truth that changes everything you thought you knew about Bob Ross. Bob Ross, the iconic figure known for his soothing voice, gentle demeanor, and remarkable landscape paintings, began cultivating his artistic talent at an early age. Long before he became a household name with the joy of painting, Bob was experimenting with brushes, colors, and textures as a child, developing a passion that would define his career. His early inclination toward art was marked not only by a fascination with nature, but also by an innate ability to translate the beauty he observed into vibrant landscapes on canvas. Those formative years were crucial, planting the seeds of the philosophy that would later define his approach: art as a form of meditation, personal expression, and joy rather than competition. Bob's personal life was complex, particularly in his early adulthood. Before achieving fame, he experienced the challenges of fatherhood at a young age, welcoming his first child as a teenager. While details of his early parenting years remain private, this early experience undoubtedly shaped his understanding of responsibility, patience, and empathy, qualities that would later emerge in both his teaching style and his interactions with students on television. In the mid-1960s, Bob's life took a new turn with his marriage to Vivian Ridge. Together, they welcomed their son Steve on August 1st, 1966. Steve became the second of Bob's children and would grow up immersed in a household where art was not just a profession, but a daily rhythm of life. The home environment reflected Bob's deep connection to creativity, as canvases, paint palettes, and the gentle smell of oils and turpentine were part of the everyday atmosphere. From an early age, Steve observed his father painting not only landscapes but also the philosophies embedded within each brushstroke. The encouragement to see potential in mistakes, to embrace imperfections, and to find joy in the process rather than just the final product. Steve's introduction to art was almost inevitable. He absorbed lessons not only from his father's techniques, but also from his approach to life. Bob's unique style emphasized accessibility, teaching that anyone could paint happy little trees or snow-capped mountains with minimal formal training. This ethos deeply influenced Steve, who would later describe the household as one where creativity was nurtured with patience and encouragement, rather than strict instruction. Remarkably, Steve showed artistic promise early on. By the age of 12, he sold his first painting, a milestone that mirrored his father's later philosophy of encouraging budding artists to find confidence in their abilities. This early achievement not only marked the beginning of Steve's own journey as a painter, but also reflected the supportive environment Bob fostered, blending artistic mentorship with parental encouragement. While many would assume that a child of the man who taught the world to paint happy little trees would naturally embrace the same path, Steve's relationship with painting and with his father's profession was far more complicated. Despite growing up surrounded by brushes, canvases, and the gentle hum of Bob's soothing voice, Steve resisted following in his father's footsteps for years, determined to forge his own identity apart from the world-famous legacy that loomed over him. From the earliest days, Steve was exposed to the beauty of art in an intimate, immersive way. The Ross household was saturated with creativity. Canvases lined the walls, paint palettes lay scattered across tables, and the rich scent of oils and turpentine filled the air. Bob Ross, ever the patient teacher, encouraged his children to explore their own artistic inclinations, hoping to instill in them the same joy and confidence he shared with millions of viewers through the joy of painting. He believed in guiding without pressuring, showing by example, and nurturing curiosity as a foundation for lifelong passion. Yet for Steve, childhood was also a time to assert independence. Like many teenagers, he felt a strong need to separate his own identity from that of his parents, and in Steve's case, that meant resisting the obvious path laid out before him. Despite his evident talent, having sold his first painting at the age of 12 and already demonstrating a natural affinity for color, composition, and brushwork, Steve deliberately distanced himself from painting as a career. Instead, he pursued other interests and sought a sense of self outside the looming shadow of his father's fame. In later years, reflecting on his youthful defiance in an interview with Vanity Fair, Steve admitted that this resistance was a common, almost instinctual reaction of a child seeking autonomy. "As kids, we all want to defy our parents and hang out with our friends," he explained. "But as we get older, we begin to understand that our parents are pushing us to be greater than themselves because they seek the best for us. Like all young kids who know little about this world, I thought I knew everything as a teenager, but had limited reference concerning what this world had to offer." His words reveal a profound understanding of the universal tension between parental guidance and youthful independence, a dynamic that is familiar to many, yet deeply personal in his case, given the public nature of his father's career. The emotional toll of these events was profound. Losing a parent is universally devastating, but the loss was compounded by the feeling of being excluded from protecting and honoring Bob's legacy. Steve, who had resisted following in his father's footsteps for years as a teenager, now confronted the irony of his situation. He could have had a meaningful role in preserving and expanding the Bob Ross brand, yet corporate maneuvering had locked him out entirely. It was a stark reminder that legacy is often as much a matter of legal structuring and corporate control as it is of talent, mentorship, and familial love. In 1995, tragedy struck son Steve when his father, Bob Ross, suddenly passed away. While his death marked the end of his personal guidance over the joy of painting empire, it also ignited a legal and familial storm that will haunt his family, especially his son Steve, for decades to come. Bob's passing occurred a mere 10 years after the establishment of Bob Ross Inc., BRI, the company he co-founded in 1985 as an equal partnership with his second wife, Jane Ross, and a married couple, Annette and Walt Kowalski. The business venture, initially intended to manage his instructional videos, paintings, and merchandise, would become a source of intense conflict after his death. The origins of this partnership trace back to 1982, when Annette Kowalski took one of Bob's painting classes. The meeting between the painter and the Kowalskis would eventually evolve into a professional partnership, blending Bob's creative vision with the Kowalskis' business acumen. Alongside Jane Ross, Bob's second wife, the group structured the company so that all four parties held equal shares. However, the balance of power shifted dramatically in 1992 with Jane's untimely death. Her shares were redistributed evenly among the remaining partners, Bob, Annette, and Walt. According to a Newsweek report at the time, this redistribution effectively reduced Bob Ross himself to a minority shareholder in the very company that controlled his own name and image, a surreal twist for a man whose likeness and art were his legacy. Bob's will and testament further complicated matters. He explicitly left the rights to his name and likeness to two people, his son Steve Ross and his older half-brother Jimmy Cox. On paper, this should have secured their ability to manage the Bob Ross brand and artistic estate. In practice, the reality was far more convoluted. The Kowalskis, leveraging the complexities of corporate law and the structure of BRI, successfully countered this arrangement. Through legal maneuvering and eventually a settlement with Jimmy Cox, they gained full control over the company, including all rights to Bob's name, image, and works. What had begun as a partnership rooted in mutual respect and shared business goals became, after Bob's death, a situation where the very people closest to him were effectively barred from exercising the rights he had intended to pass on. For Steve, the shock of this reality was immediate and devastating. In interviews years later, he recalled the first encounter with Annette Kowalski after his father's death. Annette called me 2 days after my dad died and she said, "I want you to listen to me carefully. Any Bob Ross art products, anything related to art or painting, you can never ever make those, distribute those, create a business around those. Nothing. But if you would like, you can do anything not painting or art-related that you want. You can do Bob Ross pickles, Bob Ross shoes, Bob Ross whatever. But you cannot put the Ross name on a painting or art-related product, period, for the rest of your life." The call, Steve later explained, felt like a final severing of the personal and professional ties to his father's legacy, delivered in the raw immediacy of grief. The legal battle that followed was complex and protracted. Over 2 decades after Bob's death, Steve filed a lawsuit seeking ownership rights to his father's name and likeness, aiming to reclaim what he believed was his rightful inheritance. The case drew public attention as an emblem of the broader tensions that can arise when corporate interests intersect with familial legacies. Steve's argument was straightforward yet compelling. As Bob Ross's son, he should have the ability to protect and profit from his father's artistic contributions, to continue the teaching philosophy and brand his father had worked to build. Yet despite the passage of time and the weight of emotional and moral argument, the legal system ultimately sided with Bob Ross, Inc. A judge ruled that the Kowalskis retained full control, leaving Steve without the rights to the name that had shaped both his family and his own childhood. Steve's frustration was compounded by practical considerations. While he had hoped to appeal the decision or negotiate at least the right to use his father's name for artistic endeavors, financial limitations made further legal action impossible. I didn't have the money to return to court," he told the Daily Beast, reflecting the harsh reality that legal battles over legacy often require resources far beyond what most families can muster, regardless of moral justification. The experience left a lingering sense of injustice, as the very legacy his father had created for public education, joy, and inspiration remained beyond Steve's reach. Beyond legal and corporate matters, the documentary also explores the emotional resonance of Bob Ross's work and philosophy, emphasizing how Steve's connection to painting extends beyond ownership or profit. It portrays Steve not just as an heir denied control of an empire, but as a son grappling with the dual loss of a parent and the practical ability to honor his father's legacy in the way he might have intended. His participation humanizes a story that could easily be reduced to a tale of litigation and corporate maneuvering, reminding viewers that behind every high-profile legal dispute are individuals coping with grief, disappointment, and a longing to preserve familial bonds. By contributing to the documentary, Steve also ensures that his father's legacy is framed not only in terms of television fame and artistic achievement, but also in terms of personal ethics, mentorship, and familial intention. The documentary emphasizes Bob's original vision: to share the joy of painting, to empower others, and to leave a lasting, positive mark on the world. Steve's perspective reinforces this narrative while highlighting the tension between intention and reality, showing how even the most carefully laid plans can be disrupted by legal and business complexities. In 2021, Steve Ross stepped into the public eye once again, this time not as a painter in his father's shadow, but as the central figure in a documentary exploring one of the most personal and painful chapters of his life. The film, Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal and Greed, produced by Melissa McCarthy and her husband Ben Falcone, chronicles Steve's long and arduous battle for his father's estate, focusing particularly on the legal struggles that prevented him from fully inheriting control of Bob Ross, Inc. This documentary offered viewers an intimate look at the emotional and financial turmoil that ensued after Bob Ross's death in 1995, and Steve's contribution brought a deeply personal perspective to a story that had previously been told only in fragments through interviews and news reports. Steve's participation in the documentary was not merely as a passive subject. He actively contributed to shaping the narrative, sharing insights and reflections that illuminated the human cost of the legal battles over his father's legacy. For decades, the struggle over Bob Ross's name, likeness, and artistic estate had been a largely private ordeal, but the documentary allowed Steve to speak openly about his experiences, his regrets, and the emotional complexity of losing both a father and his rightful inheritance. The film does not shy away from the difficult realities of corporate control, family disputes, and the intersection of fame, artistry, and business, using Steve's story as the emotional anchor that connects the audience to the larger legal drama. Melissa McCarthy, one of the producers, explained to NPR the intent behind highlighting Steve's perspective. She emphasized that Bob Ross had wanted the majority of his business to go to his son, a desire that had been effectively thwarted by litigation and corporate maneuvering. McCarthy said, "Bob certainly wanted it to go to most of the business to his son. He left it to his son and his brother, and very quickly that was kind of taken through litigation. And because at the time Bob's son Steve was so young, Bob thought, let's have an adult still guiding him with where he's going to take this company. But he didn't get to take hold of it at all." This explanation underscores the tragic irony of Steve's situation. Despite his father's intentions, external forces stripped him of the opportunity to manage or benefit from the very empire Bob had built. In 2021, after decades away from the easel, Steve Ross returned to painting, rekindling a connection to a craft that had been both a source of joy and a complicated legacy throughout his life. For years, Steve had wrestled with the intersection of personal ambition, grief, and the legal battles that had engulfed his father's estate. While he had inherited the artistic talent of Bob Ross and even sold his first painting at the age of 12, Steve had spent much of his adulthood navigating the emotional aftermath of being cut out of Bob Ross, Inc., the company that controlled his father's name, likeness, and artistic legacy. Painting, once a simple joy in his childhood, had become intertwined with frustration, regret, and a sense of exclusion. Yet, in 2021, coinciding with the release of Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal and Greed, Steve found his way back to the brush, reconnecting with an art form that had always been a part of him, and discovering that it could once again offer solace, creativity, and personal fulfillment. The release of the documentary, produced by Melissa McCarthy and Ben Falcone, served as a catalyst for Steve's return to painting. The film brought long overdue attention to his perspective on his father's legacy, the legal struggles over the estate, and the personal losses he had endured. As part of the promotional efforts for the documentary, McCarthy and Falcone joined Steve for a virtual painting class, a moment that bridged generations and art forms while also offering a unique opportunity for Steve to step fully into the public eye as an artist in his own right. The virtual class was designed not only to promote the film, but also to celebrate the joy of creativity, echoing the philosophy Bob Ross had shared with millions of viewers over the years. For Steve, it became a deeply personal experience, both a tribute to his father and a reclamation of his own identity as a painter. During the class, one moment in particular stood out for its emotional resonance. Steve borrowed one of his father's enduring lessons, applying it not only to painting, but to life itself. As he guided McCarthy through the process, he said, "Well, every time I have a happy accident, I learn something from that. You start to discover that you almost want to have one, because it teaches you something that you didn't know before." The statement, simple yet profound, captures the essence of the Ross philosophy, that mistakes are not failures, but opportunities for growth, discovery, and creative expression. In that moment, Steve was not merely teaching a technique. He was passing on a lifetime of lessons, his own experiences, the wisdom imparted by his father, and the hard-won understanding that art is as much about process as it is about product. What do you think about son Steve? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.